terrorism blow up after the September 11th or the 9/11 incident in the United States. From that, a global campaign called War on Terror was created. This campaign also focused on the Muslim radical group in Southeast Asia. Southeast Asia itself is predicted to be the new home base of the Al-Qaeda network. This assumption was built because countries in Southeast Asia have so low control over the border, which can cause everyone, including the terrorist members, could enter the country so quick. Seeing this threat in front of their eyes makes ASEAN choose to face danger by preparing some strategies.
We have two key questions. Number one, what is the role of ASEAN in handling terrorism cases? And number two, how is the protection of human rights related to the issue of terrorism in ASEAN? For the research, we use book by Danella Iasha titled International Relations in Southeast Asia, book by Hamid Tavangas, Suppression of Terrorist Financing over Criminalization Through International Law, an article by Praksa Alfati and Aji Haki titled Terrorism Eradication in ASEAN Countries, Human Rights Perspective. In this study, we use qualitative research methods and use secondary data sources. We raise these key questions because there are so many cases of terrorism in the world, but in the Southeast Asia region, terrorism cases that have occurred have also disturbed many parties, especially the welfare of human rights in Southeast Asian region. Therefore, we want to discuss in more detail about this case to see how far ASEAN plays a role and what are the form of policies for human rights in Southeast Asia.
In reviewing three main source views, it is found that in Tavangas' book, terrorism has been a concern in ASEAN since 1970. Unlike Witter's book, which says the terrorist group in Southeast Asia was formed due to the existence of GI or Jemaah Islamiyah in Indonesia and the existence of terrorist group from Philippines, namely Abu Sayyaf group. In Prakarsa, Al-Fatuh and Hagi's article also discuss about terrorism but more about terrorist attack, both killed and innocent life, which doesn't go along with human rights.
In the book by Donald Wetherby written that ASEAN effort and policies have not yielded result. This is because ASEAN member countries prefer to carry out bilateral or cooperative relations rather than jointly support ASEAN. Those are supported by the Tavangas' book, which states that ASEAN member states have to work together to develop their counter-terrorism system with assistance from regional partners. In the article by Praksa, Alfati and Aji Haki, on the other hand, written that efforts to protect human rights in the eradication of terrorism are the key issue for the United Nations in establishing standards and mechanisms for combating terrorism.
Terrorist attack could kill an innocent life, which this is not go along with the human rights. Efforts to protect human rights in the eradication of terrorism are a key issue for the United Nations in establishing standards and mechanisms for combating terrorism. Regarding the terrorist attack that violates human rights, ASEAN has already worked on the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights, or AICHR, as a body that monitors the implementation of principles on promoting and protecting human rights for all member countries.
The Southeast Asia region is one of the world's most vulnerable to terrorist attacks. Multiple terrorist groups fighting and fragmenting across the world, including internal conflicts among Islamist factions. Many terrorist groups would attack the Southeast Asia region because of its internal weaknesses, which also include political instability, revolt, ethical disputes, bribery, narrow-mindedness, and a poor judicial system.
ASEAN concerning the issue of terrorism before the 9/11 tragedy occurred. Since the 1997 summit, which was followed by the signing of the ASEAN Convention on Counter-Terrorism, or ACCT, in Cebu, the Philippines in 2007. ACCT Convention is a historic event for ASEAN because this is a first agreement which is legally binding for ASEAN members in terms of counter-terrorism. However, there are still weaknesses of this convention where the ACCT only functions as a means to make policy suggestions, not as a place to decide policies. So that regulation regarding terrorism problems that occur in the ASEAN region will be left to the attitude of member countries. Terrorism is a crime against humanity, which is in accordance with what is contained in the 1945 Military Court Charter in Nuremberg, which identifies crime against humanity because it contains. The first one is crimes against peace, second one is crimes due to war, and the third one is crimes that threaten humanity. Terrorism is a crime that contains these three elements, so that terrorism is a crime against humanity. Terrorism is directly or indirectly a crime that threatens human rights because it spreads terror among the civilian population. The terrorists also use weapons to spread terror. In addition, crimes against humanity are usually carried out systematically and cause physical or mental suffering, even the killing of humans in violation of the principle of international law. Just like terrorism, whose activities are systematic because they are carried out in a neat organization and action carried out by terrorist groups cause physical or mental suffering and even death to other humans. This of course violates existing international law, especially related to human rights law.
Terrorist operations had already made Southeast Asia vulnerable. Regulations to protect human rights have been put in place as a result. The ASEAN Charter includes a provision for frequent meetings of governments in the area to discuss the subject of terrorism. It requires a strategy and process based on international humanitarian law to recognize and account for terrorist activities committed by parties actively participating in the non-traditional armed conflict. Aside from that, a more comprehensive method and strategy to eradicate terrorism and human rights base are required.
Southeast Asia area is prone to terrorism attacks. ASEAN as an organization in the region is also difficult to overcome because the lack of effort, especially from the countries that are not affected. Causing the threat of terrorism is difficult to resolve because this terrorist group can take advantage of borderlines between countries to escape or even expand their network.
ASEAN member states resolved to establish the ASEAN Convention on Counterterrorism, abbreviated ACCT, which was established in Cebu, Philippines. It was established to encourage governments to work together and participate in the battle against terrorism. In the absence of an internationally agreed definition of terrorism, the human rights law has come to serve as the basis for a checklist for the conformity of definitions of terrorism or terrorist crimes with the human rights.
Various cases of terrorism that occurred as a result of joining a radical Islamic group or Al-Qaeda have brought losses whose impact has been felt by countries in ASEAN. ASEAN, as an organization that brings together 10 countries in the Southeast Asian region, has taken actions or various policies, including the signing of the ASEAN Convention on Counterterrorism or ACCT, to implementing the principles of the ASEAN Way. The occurrence of the acts of terrorism made by ASEAN then make a human rights policy based on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, so that it has included a human rights perspective which is controlled by Article 14 of the ASEAN Charter. But all the efforts and policies that have been made are still lacking. ASEAN was built on the basis of the spirit of togetherness of member countries. Therefore, to achieve a peace and also the welfare of the people in the region, member countries must play an important role.